So as we begin, the way that this discussion will unfold is each of the panelists will be given some time to talk about their respective research and their contributions to the book. And I will begin with Rita, who is one of the co-editors of Genderwashing. And so Rita, if you would begin your part of the presentation by addressing why did you want to edit a book on gender washing?
Okay, thank you so much, Dion, and thank you, Dean Donna, for suggesting this panel today. It's lovely to see so many people here today, but before I answer Deanne's question, I need to go back in time because this is in celebration of International Women's Day. And when we were putting this presentation together, the term deeds, not words, came into my head. And I thought to myself, where does that come from? I can't remember, that hearing that term before. And then I did a bit of digging. And it's actually the rallying cry for the suffragettes. And they knew more than 100 years ago, probably 150 years ago, that it's not enough to say something, we have to act. So, Genderwashing, the book, started first of all with an article that was written about 2019, was published in 2020. And the article gives some kind of context for this term. Now, there were 4 of us who wrote this article, and we, like any team, we had many different debates on what we were going to do for this article. And we decided to work on this concept of gender washing. Now, we didn't come up with it. Originally, the term comes from Martha Burke. And those of you who may have heard of greenwashing, Martha Burke was thinking about gender washing in relation to greenwashing. So that's the kind of history of the term. But the one thing that she didn't do is come up with a definition. And so this was our original definition. And for those of you who want to, you can go to the article. But one of the things we were looking at in the article was the difference between organizational rhetoric and the effective lived experiences of many people in organizations. And we were specifically interested in non-disclosure agreements and how they can create a culture of fear. Next slide, please. So that gives you a little bit of background to the book. Here you'll see the volume editors. And this book is a research primer. This is not the last word in gender washing. This is the start of something that we hope that other people will take up. And in this book, we have about 12 chapters. We have authors from 6 different countries who take up the concept of gender washing in very different ways. And it's really exciting for those of us who edited this book to see the different ways that people took it up. And one of the strengths of the book, not only its international focus, is the fact that we have people from lots of different disciplines who took up this notion of gender washing, from feminist phenomenology, which is key to my heart, from memory work, people who looked at critical policy analysis, and who looked at different areas of society. So for instance, you've got chapters that look at girl power and the way in which corporations take up ideas, but they're not necessarily, the marketing campaigns do not necessarily connect with what is happening in different countries. We also have chapters that look at higher education, and other chapters that look at organizations in a more general way. But what emerges from this book is the different ways in which moving towards equity in organizations, not just for women, but for marginalized individuals, is such a difficult task, not least because of bureaucratic structures and resistance to effective change. Does that answer your question, Dion?
Yes, thank you. Rita, do you care to elaborate any more on the construction of the book and its outline and again, the impetus behind why this volume is critical in 2025?
I think that notion of criticality is so important, right? We are seeing rollbacks of programs in the US, DIE programs in Canada, EDID programs. People who work in those programs are seeing, that some of them are losing their jobs. But in terms of gender, we are not making the moves that we hoped that we would make, right? In the workplace, we're still a long way to gender equity. I think the World Economic Forum put something out in 2022, which said that it would be another 150 years before there would be gender equity in terms of pay in the workplace. So these are some of the reasons why we think that it's really important to look at gender from different perspectives, and that's why we think gender washing is so important, because together with the concept of intersectionality, gender washing offers a more structural way of thinking about the problems that people face on a day-to-day level in the workplace.
Excellent. And Rita, I have one more question for you as we advance to the next couple of slides, which outline the chapters. If you would just briefly speak to some of these, which you had done so earlier, but these next two slides really show the titles and the broad swath of topics that you mentioned earlier. And the depth of the focus on women in leadership as it relates to gender washing.
Yeah, sure. So you can see there some of the chapters and the diversity of the chapters. You can see there how we're seeing a lot of chapters on higher education. And I know Carol is going to speak to that. So I'm going to turn it over to Carol to go a bit more in detail as to why there are so many chapters in this book on
thank you, Rita. Yeah, so I mean, we won't read every chapter title, but I think just looking at these chapter titles gives you a very good, clear indication of the breadth, the range of sectors, and also I'm reminded, just looking at the titles, actually, the different methodological approaches authors took in writing their chapters for us, from, quite autoethnographic, my God, it's been a long week, piece in the first chapter to kind of more traditional research-based pieces in other chapters. So if we could just move to the next slide, please. Great, Andrew. And as you can see, I mean, Hayley is going to speak, and then Tuba will speak after me about her chapter about gender washing in Pakistani higher educational institutions. And as we've already identified, there are several chapters that do look at the higher education sector. And I suppose there are several reasons for that. Well, most of the chapter authors are employees of higher education institutions. They're scholars, they're researchers, and they have intimate knowledge of higher education, either as very senior people within higher education, or researchers or academics undertaking their day-to-day tasks as a woman academic member of staff. So those higher education chapters are written from the perspective of people who have been employed in different positions, but also might have had significant authority as well, positional power in those institutions. So those are very illuminating chapters around what happens when there is this mismatch, as Rita described it, between organizational rhetoric and the lived experiences of people, women and non-binary individuals working in higher education. I mean, higher education is also important, I think, as a sector to interrogate with regards to gender washing, because it's, you know, it's a significant global employer, employs many jobs, not just for academics, but for all professional services staff. It creates income for local cities, towns, communities, and itself has a rich and complex history that actually reflects dynamics of gender equity and inequity over time, and in multiple cultural and different societal contexts. So it's good, I think, that we do have chapters looking at higher education from different countries, different nations. Higher education, it's also a great place to study because it's got a variety of different kinds of institutions, different sizes, different locations geographically, as I've just said, and a great diversity population of employees. So in Britain, in north of England, where I've worked for many years, it brings a great diversity to regions which potentially might not have had such a diversity of community without that higher education institution. It has multiple stakeholders: government, employers, business and industry. Higher education is important for nation states. And, you know, we're having a bit of a crisis in the UK, and I believe so in Canada, around funding. But that just shows I think that crisis actually illuminates how crucial higher education is to nation states who position themselves as being part of a broader knowledge economy. And finally, I suppose the final thing I'd like to say is, when we think about our students, higher education is responsible for educating current, future workforce, including our future leaders and managers. And, you know, myself, and I know everybody in the panel here, and I'm sure everybody in the audience, if you are an academic working in a university, you think, you know, the students are the most important people in that university. So we feel those chapters really shine a light on some of the not so great things that happen in universities with regard to inequity, but also I think are ones, as Rita said, this isn't the definitive volume. They just are one piece in a developing story, we would hope. So I hope that answers your question, Dion. And I think
excellent. Yes, Carol, very thorough.
Tuba to go into much more detail about her specific chapter about Pakistani HEIs.
And Tuba, before you speak about your chapter, also talk about how gender washing is relevant in other countries.
Thank you so much, Jan. See, while I have been teaching in Pakistan for almost 10 years, and while I was teaching, when I was a student, we had this kind of an implicit notion that whatever we are studying, this is a Western concept. It does not necessarily apply to us. And this is how we studied. This is how we learned. Although we follow all, the benchmark for all the policies is international. We follow the Western policies, but we still have this, inside of our mind, back of the head, we have this. After coming to Canada, I was able to relate that it is not the same, but there is a similarity. We may use a different terminology, we may see it differently, but it is present there. So, even if we are not using the same terminologies, it is still present there. And the way that, when this book chapter came up and we talked about gender washing, I recalled one of the policies, which is the sexual harassment policy in Pakistan. Surprisingly, in 2010 was the first time when sexual harassment was actually recognized as, something existing over there, and we had a policy. It was the first time that was included in the legal system. So when we talked about, gender washing, we analyzed that there are a lot of contradictions in the policy. In Pakistan, all the policies come from the Higher Education Commission, which is the aggregating body, which is the head of all of the universities for the courses and policies and everything. And in that policy, they were unable to address the main discrimination or, the sexual harassment that was happening. Pakistan is a very segregated society. Men and women are separate, but in a university, they are together, they're working together, they are studying together. So we decided to analyze the policy through critical discourse analysis, but we had a combined methodology, and we used how the collaborative feminist policy analysis, in which we saw that how the text contributes to the cultural and societal and political norms, and how it, advocates for all the discrimination and, everything that is happening, how it addresses that. And while we went through the policy language, we realized there were a lot of bucket codes. There were a lot of gender language. The policy uses, sometimes it uses some gender neutral uh, words, such as members of the community or the affected person. Although it says that, that, okay, it's a neutral language, anyone can be there. It talks, on the surface level, we can say it talks about all the fairness and, it's neutral and fair, it is applicable to everyone. But inside, we are saying that all the incidents are the same. Everything is the same, which again undermines what actually, is actually happening. So, in the same way we see in the gender explicit language that was used in the policy, in which for all the complainants, we were using she. If she went into the office, if he called her in the office, and like if the men were abusing mothers and sisters, or if the men were using inappropriate language related to women in front of the women. So, again, they were talking about that, whatever is happening, all the complaints that are making are the females, and the people who are actually doing it are the men. But there was certain, gender implicit language as well, and gender explicit, that, explicitly we were saying that it's the women who are making the complaints. And then, implicitly we are also saying that, the victims are female, we are using she. And if he called her in the office, if he called her after hours, again, there were a lot of gender power dynamics, in which, in Pakistan, everything in a university is under the vice chancellor. So if we are forming a committee of, for sexual harassment and, the inquiry and complaint process, what if the vice chancellor is the person who for against whom the complaint has been made? Now, what will the committee do? Because the committee knows that the vice chancellor can easily fire them. So what happens then? So like that, there was a lot of gendered power dynamics over there. Um, Again, there were tokenism that, the policy clearly states that in a committee, at least there should be one woman, three members should be there, one should be a woman. So again, it shows a lot of tokenism that the woman is only there because the policy states so. Who has the actual power? And whenever the complaint is made, the final decision might be made by the vice chancellor. And they were really fast tracking the policy. Within 24 hours, they should take an action. Within 3 hours, within 3 days, action should be taken. So when the fast track process comes up and you have a person in power, and you are clearly stating that all the perpetrators are male and the complainants are female, again, it is a kind of gender washing, um, in which we are actually undermining what is actually happening with the gender. So what we realized, that the policy which was actually made to protect the women against this harassment and workplace discrimination was an example of institutional gender washing, in which the institution was actually, they were nodding that yes, it did that, okay, that the sexual harassment is happening, there is sexism, but they were actually not addressing the discrimination and the uh, all the oppression that was happening against the women. So, doing this chapter, we realized that yes, gender washing might be a Western term, but it is still applicable in the South Asian countries as well. I hope I was able to.
Tuba, yes, and I want to give you a little more time to speak to this question, and that is, since writing and publishing this chapter, have you seen conditions improving in this arena or getting worse for women?
Having writing this, you know, because my own research is about women leadership as well, and I've realized that, it's been years that we have been talking about this issue in one way or another. We have tried to bring up different solutions for this as well. Although I am hopeful that in the future things are much better for the women, I'm still hopeful. But I do see that we overall, because we have been talking about the same things, I think we may need to have maybe a different approach to the problems that women are facing. We have been highlighting that the women are unable to get the leadership positions, that the women are being harassed, there's sexual harassment and sexism in the institutions. And we have been saying it very explicitly and loudly for years. So yes, I am hopeful that in the future things would change. But with that, I do believe that, actively there are some things that we need to work on and maybe change a little, maybe change the approach, um, work on, the kind of strategies that we can have to bring a change.
Thank you very much. And so we'll shift gears just a bit and now focus on Haley. And Haley will speak to gender washing and its how applicable this term is to sport. So Haley?
Thank you, Dion. Yes, gender washing was such a wonderful concept to apply to the sport context because sport continues to be an environment where there is a very distinct gender binary, whether that is in sports participation, coaching, or funding experiences, for example. So gender washing was a really wonderful concept to apply within the sport specific context. And within our chapter, I wanted to highlight that I wrote this chapter with Dr. Jennifer Chisholm, who is located at Lakehead University. And we took the opportunity to explore the ways in which sport organizations, specifically Hockey Canada, handle sexual violence cases. So using the lens of gender washing, we focused on Hockey Canada's response to a 2018 sexual assault case, arguing that their actions were largely superficial and as a result actually end up perpetuating the very issues that they claim to address. So within our chapter, we assessed how Hockey Canada used gender washing techniques such as non-disclosure agreements, settlements, or education and training efforts. And with each of these strategies, it made it seem like they were just addressing gender inequality and sexual violence within the organization. But in fact, their efforts did little to challenge the organization's current culture. In order to explore this, Dr. Chisholm and I applied media content analysis. So essentially, we collected a wide variety of online media sources, newspaper articles, and statements. Specifically, one being pretty impactful to the chapter was Hockey Canada's press release following the 2018 sexual assault case. At first glance, it appeared that this statement they put out was was a decisive action. But upon further investigation, and like Tuba had mentioned, once we started to evaluate the language, some powerful themes started to come out for us. We found that the statement itself ended up being very vague and non-committal, and actually ended up blaming the victim instead of the organization taking any real accountability. Another crucial element within our chapter in terms of Hockey Canada's use of gender washing practices was non-disclosure agreements, or NDAs for short, and their use of settlements. By settling cases privately and enforcing NDAs upon victims or survivors of sexual violence, Hockey Canada ended up effectively silencing them and preventing them from speaking out and sharing their experiences, which can be very harmful when it comes to looking to address culture change. Finally, Dr. Chisholm and I looked at the education and training efforts that were released as a reaction to the 2018 case from the organization. And again, at first glance, education and training, that's wonderful. But we ended up, again, evaluating the program and saying, well, wait a minute, this again is a response rather than a preventative measure. And what does this do to really start to create change within the organization itself? So just to conclude, what we can learn about this specific case that we evaluated in the chapter is that sport organizations like Hockey Canada may use gender washing practices to create an illusion of progress, just kind of like what Tuba had mentioned within her chapter. But without really addressing and engaging with the underlying issues, then they only serve to perpetuate a culture where sexual violence remains normalized and silenced. So despite the superficial efforts kind of taken to address the problem of sexual violence within the Hockey Canada organization, we ended up concluding that the response effectively leaves the deeper issues unchallenged. And this is something that I continue to engage with my work more broadly. Again, sport is a very interesting context to apply gender washing to because there is such a distinct gender binary. And because of that, often some bodies are prioritized over others. And as I mentioned, we can see this when it comes to funding or participation opportunities. And we really started to expand or encourage others to expand from this chapter when we start to think about sport experiences, not only for women, but also for transgender or non-binary athletes or participants as well.
Wow, thank you, Haley.
Thank
So, additional follow-up question for you. So much of your talk was on hockey, and so would you suggest that your analysis could be applied to other sports?
Yes, definitely. I would love to see this concept applied in a variety of different ways, not only in different sport contexts or to different sport organizations, but different cases or reactions to social issues within sport. So, like I had mentioned, this case focused on a response to gender-based violence, sexual violence. But again, expanding that even further is something that this chapter encourages, and I think more broadly, the book does a really good job of encouraging as well.
Excellent. Well, I would like to open the floor for the panelists to offer any additional insights as we shift to the Q&A portion of this webinar. And if you'll note in the chat, Mr. Andrew has posted a comment there. So again, if you have a question or a comment, please begin to post those that feedback in the chat box, and we will ensure that the panelists address your questions. So panelists, any burning comments as you've heard your colleagues speak, anything that has come to mind as it relates to gender washing? And I know, Dean, Donna, you've had some significant reflections, in fact, prior to the start of the webinar. And if I may take a moment of privilege to create an opportunity for you to share some of your insights that we talked some about before the webinar began, and that may spur additional discussion.
Well, thank you very much for all the thoughtful comments. And I'm going to return to Haley's comment after I just offer what I shared before the webinar started. I'm also president of Senior Women Academic Administrators Canada, and I mentioned this at the beginning. A couple of really interesting studies were released earlier this week on university affairs. I'll post links to it, and perhaps you can have a look at it. But Rita mentioned that to get the kind of equity that we're looking for, it's going to take about 150 years, and that's no surprise. The data pretty much has not changed in over 30 years. at least in the area of higher education. Women are less likely to be at the rank of associate or full professor. We're more likely to earn less money between, it could vary in terms of dollars, but in general, 5 to 10% less. We are less likely to be in leadership roles. We are less likely to experience leadership at the very highest ranks of vice president and president. In fact, there's many institutions that we know of that have yet to this day had a female president. Of that 30%, over close to 61% are very likely to experience what they call an abrupted term, either forced to be fired or be fired. And there is a very high probability of experiencing more harassment and discrimination than a male counterpart. Now, what I would often say, I think women have to be part of the solution as well. We often talk about opening the door for other women, when the door is open, walking through, but all of us should really reflect critically in terms of how many doors we've opened for others. The issue of harassment and discrimination is quite interesting, and I was inspired by some of Tuva's comments, and perhaps different contexts breed different results, but you're just as likely to be harassed by a female than you are a male. So it's not that there is one perpetrator there in terms of the harassment and discrimination. What we do know is that you're more likely to experience it if you're a female, if you're a woman, and a woman leader in particular. So, but one of the things that I've been focusing on in my own research, it's interesting, Haley, I've looked at your work too, is I have a project that's called The Buying of Silence, the use of non-disclosure agreements and the termination or abrupted terms of women leaders, and the silencing effect that those non-disclosure agreements have, not only in continuing to perpetrate harassment and discrimination, but essentially creating almost an insurmountable roadblock in terms of career movement. The irony there is, if we look in Canada, for example, the legal society in Canada is really divided on whether we continue to use these non-disclosure agreements. So I'm a huge advocate of not only understanding them, but making sure that women understand the ramifications of signing one of these and their requirement not to sign it and still maintain access to certain rights. I also did share at the beginning that I often wonder what I would say particularly to women, when I have nothing left to lose.
Donna, thank you for posing that. I was hoping you would raise that question. And if you would repeat that, and I would ask each of the panelists to respond to Donna's question. And Donna, if you could repeat your question.
Sure. I often imagine what I would say, particularly to other women who I do hold the bar a little bit higher. What would I say to them when I have nothing left to lose? Nothing left to lose.
Rita, that's the curveball question that you were waiting for.
Well, it's so interesting because it takes me back actually to my PhD thesis and how I interviewed women leaders from in higher education in different parts of the world. And I remember someone who was retiring that year being the most open about her experiences. And I think it speaks to what you're saying there, Donna. But I also just noticed that there is a question for Haley to answer in the chat.
Just pulling this up now. So the question asks, your work in this chapter is specific to a sporting organization, but I wondered if you could talk about the possibilities of using the concept of gender washing in higher education and sport. Thank you, Melody. I think, again, gender washing is pretty impactful when applied to different sectors of sport. Again, specifically in higher education. Sometimes sport or varsity level sport can be maybe not as considered as part of the student experience in higher education, but for many it is a big part of their experience in university or post-secondary education. A lot of my work is focused in that specific context. And again, applying gender washing there is impactful because it remains an area where there is a distinct gender binary, specifically in the context of higher education. University sport and post-secondary sport is also very interesting because there's a clear hierarchy of sport as well. We have certain sports that bring in a lot of money for the institution that are often receiving more funding opportunities, for example, more media coverage, for example, compared to others. So applying gender washing and comparing different sport experiences based on where sports fall on that specific hierarchy, I think could be pretty impactful in terms of athlete experience. Additionally, sports in higher education, as many of the presenters had alluded to, also remains an area where women remain underrepresented in leadership positions. So again, looking at applying the concept of gender washing in relation to women coaches' experiences, their experiences on boards, their experiences as leaders within sport in higher education would also be, I think, a powerful area to explore as well.
Thank you. And if I could just take the next question, because I think it's so important. An anonymous attendee said, the challenge is that there is so much to lose. It's difficult to keep your hand up if you're not in a position of privilege. And I hear you. I absolutely hear you. And there's much research that bears this out. And we know anecdotally from friends, right, that have worked in different places, that people are fearful. And obviously, if you need to, if you're the breadwinner for your family, it's difficult to speak up. But the problem is, when we don't speak up, things don't change, right? So it's one of those real difficult situations, right? How can we affect change? Well, at the
Rita,
same time,
if I can add to your comments, and I, without question, agree with you. We have an obligation to speak up, but I would add we have to do so strategically and with intentionality. And there has to be strategy in what we do. And as a woman of color, an African American woman in the U.S., having worked most of my education experience, and I've been in higher ed for close to 30 years in the southeastern region of the United States. So you can extrapolate a lot of contextual things that you can assume that I may have experienced along that journey. And so one of the things that I've committed to doing is speaking up, but again, speaking up with intentionality and strategy, and ensuring that when I see something that is not right, as the late John R. Lewis, Congressman Lewis, has stated, we have an obligation to speak up and do something. You have to do something. And that doing something could be something simple as using your voice through your research. And so that's one of the ways in which I've attempted to continue to advance the needle and ensuring that we document in spaces that are considered reputable and document what we've experienced, so that when my daughter becomes of age, which she's there to some extent, she can go back and review and read what her mom has written about so that she can learn from what we've experienced. And I also think we have an obligation to remain hopeful. And this is something that Tuba had spoken to, I think, offline. Being hopeful despite all of the noise. And it is just that, it is noise. All the noise that's happening around us and what we see happening to us, it's noise. And it's the noise that's coming at you, and the strategy and the approach that's being used to place all of this noise and pressure on you. The intent is to make you retreat, to make you fearful, to make you fatigued to the point where you begin to ignore and what the context of the situation, and you begin to retreat and focus on self. We cannot. We can do neither. And there's an element of risk. And so as leaders, it's a risky business. Okay, if you assume the role of a leader, it's risky. And again, I'm going to refer back to John R. Lewis. He laid his life. He chose to put his life on the line to ensure not just the United States, not just African Americans, but that we live in a world where everyone has the opportunity to succeed, and we do it together in a peaceful way, an equitable way. And so again, as leaders, we've got to take some risky moves, but again, with strategy and with intentionality. And I refuse to not do my part, because we have women, young girls, and men who are in alignment with our vision and where we see the world, and they need to see individuals who are willing to step forward. So I hope that offers some insight. I see Donna, you've got your hand raised, and Tuba. So Donna, if I may go to Tuba and then go to you. Tuba and then Donna.
Thank you so much, Jan. When the question about, when there's nothing to lose, I can kind of relate to it being in Canada. When we were doing this research, my co-authors, Dr. Rita Gardiner and Casey Egan, they actually helped me realize a lot of things which I thought might be a norm and which was quite common in the society. And when the three of us did the research together, a lot of things did come up, and I was able to write it explicitly with them in the paper, because I'm not in Pakistan anymore. I'm in Canada. So, and maybe in the future I might stay in Canada. So it's kind of made it easier for me to explicitly criticize the policy along with my co-authors, Dr. Rita and Casey. Maybe if I was in Pakistan, I might have talked about the policy, but not, criticized it or, pointed out so many things in the policy because of, again, the consequences that I would have faced later on.
Donna?
Thank you.
Thank you, Dion, for your comments. I wanted to highlight too that for many of us, we're finding ourselves in a minority group at the leadership front, including what you had shared, Dion, in your own institution. And I'm going to be one of two female deans left at Western. There is, and just back to that statistic, that females are more likely to have abrupted terms. So there's 30% of us, and of the 30%, 61% will have an abrupted term. There is an onus on us, I do agree, in terms of speaking up and standing and being on the record. And a good half chunk of my life's work has been for being on the record. But what I'm seeing is that the people surrounding us are not stepping up. Where we need voices to say, hey, there's one of us in the whole senior administration team. We need others to actually be engaging in that dialogue. Because if you're not, you're almost reporting it, right? So as a single voice standing up when you've got nothing to lose if you've gotten to that point without a community echoing that song, there's a wider accountability here that just hasn't been happening.
And if I can circle back to the last question or comment that we see in the chat box, and I'll be more specific to, and it's related to in the US as pressure continues to increase in silencing voices in research topics. And so I would offer and a personal approach here is there, I think a lot of individuals who are in the higher ed space, you have to do some reassessing of where you see yourself in the future, right? And again, going back to is this a moment where perhaps you need to shift where you see yourself as higher ed the space for you to continue your message, your advocacy, is that where you need to be? And that's a hard decision to make when you have to make a shift or career shift, right? And I think a lot of individuals are having to reassess where they are professionally and career-wise and where they want to go, and to myself included, right? I, gosh darn it, would hate to feel contained and silenced when with my research agenda, when my intent is not to offend anyone. My intent is to give voice to ensure that, again, we're documenting what is reality, and so that it is not forgotten and we learn from it. So I don't know if that offers additional guidance for you, but to say that I think there's some soul searching that many of us are having to go through to think about what is our future, and what adjustments are we willing and perhaps need to make from a career standpoint. All right, colleagues, and help me if I don't think I see any other comments in the chat here.
I see a few, Dion. There's one that you're the only one. Well, Donna might be able to answer it. I can't.
Okay.
Barbara asks, is there any advice for those conducting research involving women's issues, especially with US partners who feel pressure to shift their research program in fear of not receiving research funding? What's your thoughts about that?
Anna, you want to take that one, or?
Yeah, it's tricky. I think I've shared
Yes.
with you that I just recently had an NSF grant that went in, and with collaborators and Community College of New York State, and it was we did have to sanitize it from any comments related to EDI. But I think under these contexts, and I'm not a historian and I don't have the deep background that our panelists have on this matter, but it makes me feel like we're back to that underground movement again. But it's not in the grant, but it's unavoidably the grant. And so you can't discuss learning and how people learn and the distinctions of learning. You can't discuss how we become leaders. You can put it down on paper, but we all know that it's going to come back to these critical issues of how we define EDI and how we live it. And so this is what's happening with NSF. Dion, you might be, if there's anybody else doing applications to NSF and the other funding agencies, you'll see that this is exactly what we've been asked to do. In fact, I wasn't sure as a Canadian that I was going to be eligible to participate, but it does feel very much like the underground movement. Maybe it's not on paper. But it's indistinguishable from the work that we do if we're looking to create research that addresses all people, inclusion, and making sure we're looking to level the playing field.
So I want us to remind ourselves we've got a playbook, and one of the congresswomen who I had heard, she's Congresswoman Crockett. She's I believe, represents Texas, and either California or Texas, excuse me. And so she made a comment that we actually have a playbook. We go back to the historical movements where, and as to Donna's point, there were some quote unquote underground efforts. But really what she was speaking to is strategy, right? And so mobilization, collectivism, and strategy, when those three things come together, gosh, you can fight off just about anything. And so one of the areas where, as a globe, and perhaps even as a collective group, we may not be, as women, we may not be working in concert, right? In terms of a strategy. And then likewise, we can't do this work alone. We have to have allies who perhaps do not look like us. And so there again, it goes back to the strategy, collaboration, and mobilization. And I think when those three things come together, and there it's happening. I think people are waking up and recognizing that we've got to get back to the roots, the basics, if you will, of activism. And when that happens, we're going to begin to see the momentum shift in the right direction. Rita, did we any other questions that you may see that I've omitted?
There are a few, but there's just a
Okay.
couple of comments I want to make, because
Okay.
just to build on that, and I'm going to go back to bell hooks and the notion that feminism is for everyone, gender washing is for everyone. And absolutely, we need to keep working towards effecting change. But someone asked the question, are any of you working on gender washing right now? Well, the answer is yes. Like, we're Casey, Haley, and I are just starting a new paper which is going to look at gender washing and toxic masculinity within higher education. One of the people in this volume, Rosie Walters, is writing a full-length book about girl washing and corporations in marketing. That will be a fantastic book. And I don't know, Carol, if you're thinking about working on anything, but this is something that I hope all of you on the call maybe think about moving this forward, because we just started something and we need lots of voices, not just us.
Donna, there's a question that is specific to you. This is when you say community standing up, are you referring to male counterparts or women in other roles?
I'm going to say that I'm referring to both, but I don't know that we're doing enough as for women standing up for other women. I will also share that on International Women's Day, March 8th every year, which happens to be my mother's birthday, when I get up in the morning and think about the people that stood up for me, that put the calls in for me, that picked me up when I was down, that reassured me, that have just marched with me, even when I haven't asked them to do that, has been 4 men. I want to be able to point to a woman having that role in my history, but it's challenging. I would challenge all of us to be that person for someone else, and I think it's only in those instances that we make change. But it definitely, I think, on both sides, I will say, even with my own male counterparts, are they noticing? And I think not noticing is a matter of convenience.
Well said, Donna. And so I'm checking the time, and I believe we're nearing the conclusion of this webinar. Is that correct, Rita? I want to make sure I've got the timing right here. Do we have extra time?
I don't believe so, but Andrew, can you confirm that
Yeah,
we're
I think
supposed to finish at noon?
Yep, we are, yeah. So, okay. So Donna offered a great segue in terms of a call to action. And so I'd like to, for one or two of our panelists to really speak to the notion of what is the call to action before we conclude this webinar. What I may do is to lean on Rita, since you've been the glue and really the conduit through which all of us have come to this important discussion and dialogue. And one of the really the reasons why this book came to be. And so if you wouldn't mind, offer a call to action, and we will conclude shortly. So Rita, 1 minute.
1 minute. Okay, we can't do better than the suffragettes' call. Deeds, not words, people. Let's not just talk to one another, but let's work in whatever way we can. Some of us are scholars, some of us are practitioners, but all of us can try and move things forward so that we can live in a world where we can be our best selves and where everyone can flourish.
Well said, Rita. Wow. Outstanding. Well, colleagues, again, thank you so much for giving of your time, your expertise, and most importantly, your passion and your advocacy for an important topic that will be here to stay for years to come. And I appreciate your willingness to stay in the fight and the cause to ensure that women and young girls and that our rights remain protected and so forth. So Dean, Donna, any concluding remarks? And then we'll turn it over to Andrew as we conclude this webinar.
My sincere thanks to each of you. Thank you so much for joining us today and helping us honor International Women's Day. Sincere thanks to each of the guests who made time to come and listen to these important conversations. A special shout out. We have a teacher here with her entire class watching, and I want to send that message to the students and to the teacher to thank her for having this engagement with us. Andrew, thank you for coordinating. And again, a final thanks to Rita for taking up the invitation when I reached out to her and said, can we talk about this important work? Please keep the conversations going. I appreciate Dion's comments about positivity and Rita's comment about so many good things happening. The momentum is there. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Have a wonderful weekend.